In step 18 of this IPL course on self-awareness, we start with a more practical mental model for how thoughts are processed in your mind, and relating that to some extent to the physiological makeup of your mind with neurons and synapses and stuff like that, but avoiding going too much into the medical aspects.
I will say before I leave this board, all this left and right brain and stuff is complete rubbish, actually. It's not how your mind processes information. Actually, over the top of your brain, right around this area here, there's a bunch of cells. It's like a very high-speed network, and it collects information from all over your brain, bangs it up here, and processes it, and shares it, and connects it up. And it distributes the information to a bunch of special purpose processors that are all over your mind. And you have, as it were, centers of excellence inside your mind to perform certain types of activity. I'll just give you one example: recognizing writing and the alphabet and words. So you learn that as a child. It takes you a long time. It can take you a year or two to learn to read if you're teaching small kids. But once you've learned it, the essence of it and the sort of summary of it and the speeding up of it all goes into a particular special subject matter expert. I call them SMEs, subject matter expert, and it's a processor. If you have a computer, it's quite possible, if it's a decent computer, it'll have a special card in it called a graphics card. And that's a card that does graphics much more quickly than the ordinary processor inside your computer. And your mind has equivalent of graphics cards, only it's not just for graphics, it's for pretty well everything that requires a lot of processing. They have these special condensed networks within your mind that perform these different activities. So what's important is your subconscious has to decide how to optimize its reaction, bearing in mind that it has a high speed, as it were, super high fast broadband network here, and it allocates the processing of those things to all these special processors, and then it then decides, well, I'm not going to tell you now what it decides. We'll come on to that. I had a little spark of energy there, so that's a decent introduction to it. What I didn't feel I could do was leave you thinking that I believe this left and right brain stuff was good enough, because it's not good enough. You can't really work with it very much to fully understand and fully learn. So I am going to stop there. And hopefully, as soon as I've got some energy, we'll come back and we do it properly.
Becoming self-aware is a journey. And on any difficult journey, it helps to have a guide. We can look back at people who've tried to provide a guide to people over the years. In our culture in the Western world is to go right back to the myths of Greece and Rome. There was a brilliant book written by a guy called Tomas Bulfinch. He lived in Boston and he collected together all the stories about the Greek gods. And in 1855, he wrote a book called The Age of Fable. Now, it was an instant bestseller, and it was translated into various languages, and it arrived in Europe around 1856. That happened to be the year when a chap called Sigmund Freud was born. As Freud grew up, this book was top of the bestseller list, really, and it influenced him, and he became very interested in what's called the psyche. Now, Psyche was one of the characters in the myths of Greece and Rome. And over the many, many years, Sigmund Freud developed a theory of the psyche. Now, he didn't want it to be presented as a fable or a story. He was a believer that all these sorts of thoughts could be built into a structure, a scientific structure. And he tried to build a model of the mind, just as you and I are working on building a model of the mind here together. Now, he worked at that for 40 years. So he was born in 1856, and around 1920, he started to produce articles about his model of the mind. Now, the best known one of them was published in 1923, and it was what's called the Iceberg model. And it had in it words like the id and the ego and the conscious and the unconscious and the subconscious, and all these sorts of words, which you and I have been using pretty freely in our discussion in all these different lectures. Freud also used a method called the dialogue. He was a believer in having his patients sit on a couch and he would have a dialogue with them and try to understand their psyches. Now, we're doing something not quite the same, because clearly I can't be talking to you and you can't be giving me answers. But the model that we've produced is based on many, many conversations and hundreds of hours of practical experience, so that we can produce a model that's really practical. You're just a practical person who wants to improve themselves and lead a happy life. And so this model that we're developing together is going to do that. It's not derived from any of these other models. I just mentioned those so you realize people have been trying to do this for a very long time. And the model we have now is what's called empirical rather than theoretical. So hang in there. I know it's a little bit of a slog, but believe me, by the end of it, you will have achieved that level of self-awareness which you can then build on and improve daily as you go through your life. You will have a solid foundation from which to approach your conscious, your subconscious, your unconscious, and all the rest of those words.
So I'm going to be talking to you about this whole business of self-awareness. If you watch the Corbin dialogues, which is the videos, the Socratic dialogues I have with Corbin, every now and then I give him a little assignment, like talking to camera and talking about certain things. One of the most difficult things that he finds is talking about self-awareness and consciousness. And that's not surprising, because as you've grown up, that's been something that has happened automatically to you. You have not had to consciously engage in your self-awareness. Now, we're going to talk about that, because if you're going to improve, if you're going to develop yourself, if you're going to empower yourself with soft skills and being more aware of the situation you're moving into, you need to be able to consciously, at such time as appropriate, change your mindset and your behavior from just acting spontaneously to acting in a controlled way. That doesn't mean in an artificial way. It means in a way that benefits from your learning. Just as when you drive a car, you start off as a learner and you have to learn which gear to go in and which pedals to push and all that sort of thing. And then gradually it moves into being an automatic process for you. So what we're doing with these videos and this whole course is helping you start to learn again, building on from when you stopped learning about yourself and your self-awareness. And we need to catch up from everything you've missed while you haven't been doing that, and then take you on further from normal to good to great to excellent. That's the aspiration. So coming back to this situation we left in previous, they are lectures in a way. I can pretend they're not lectures, but they're basically me talking, using a whiteboard and trying to explain something to you. So how much of this can we do away with? Somebody kindly added, I left this stuff on the board yesterday, and somebody kindly came along and put this sort of stuff on. That's not my stuff. They stuck it on there because that's their perception of what goes on inside the human mind. And in some respects, it's right. But again, it's a massive simplification. And really, just looking at it, you can't learn very much. And I could take up from that person what that person left there, and I could start talking to you about all this. But within 2 or 3 minutes, your brain would stop learning from it. And what we're going to cover now in the next half an hour or so is why that wouldn't work. Why me just standing here explaining to you all these processes and what goes on, why it wouldn't work and why you wouldn't learn. So let's start by rubbing that out. I'm grateful to whoever it was sticking it on there, but it's not where we're coming from today. I'm going to rub out this. As you know, I'm not a great believer in the physiological stuff. Physiological stuff, what's the actual chemistry of it and so on, it's very, very interesting, and it's a new area of science, but actually not going to help you learn very much. I think what I might do is quickly introduce the physiology for a few minutes, because that's a starting point, and when you want to teach, you take people from the familiar to the new. So I will do a little bit on it. And in fact, as a aide-memoire, as they say, memory jogger, what will I talk to you about? I will talk to you about what's called RAS, neurons, synapses, dendrites. There's all sorts of other stuff comes in here, axons. This is all part of the nervous system. And that's about it. I don't want to talk about it too much. Once I talk about it, maybe a few extra fancy words will come out or not. I don't like using all the fancy words, not least because I'm an absolute rubbish speller. So, okay. So as I said, I will talk briefly to you about how the nervous system and how it's all connected up. Inside your mind is I think they reckon it's a couple of billion neurons, I think. Now, a neuron, I'm going to do this absolutely minimum because you can look this up on YouTube. There are very, very good lectures on YouTube that cover all of this, especially not the guys talking up using long words, but the little diagrams, the graphic, the animated things to help people learn psychology. But they're very good and well worth watching. So you have a thing in the middle, and you've got a neuron, it's got connections into it, and then it goes off here, and there's a bulbous kind of thing on the end. So the input comes in here. All this stuff around here is called the dendritic structure. There's a piece in the middle that's actually got your genes in it. It's formed by your genes. So it's predetermined in this element of what your neurons are going to look like to some extent. Although, as you grow older, some of these sensors get knocked out. And in fact, if you do drugs to excess, you can actually absolutely knacker what goes on in this process. The neurons detect inputs. It sends the information along a short path. There's a bunch of pretty sophisticated stuff on the end there, and it sends off kind of chemical signals to another part of the network, and that's got its connections. And there's receptors here. So this.
In step 19 of this IPL course on self-awareness, we're going to talk some more about how your mind has built up a neural network to help you understand the world and behave in an appropriate manner.